Gerald Holt grabbed Ava's wrist so hard she felt the bones compress. He yanked her backward, away from the patient, away from the wound still bleeding through the gauze, and slammed her into the supply cart behind her. Metal crashed. Saline bags hit the floor. Every person in that bay froze. "I said don't touch him." His face was 2 inches from hers, jaw locked, eyes cold. "You do not exist in this room. Do you understand me? You do not exist." Then he turned to the staff and said it loud enough for the whole hallway, "GDK. She's fired. GDK her out." Nobody moved to stop him. Nobody said a word, and she walked out, head up, hands steady, because Ava Harper had been trained never to flinch. Before we go any further, if you are watching this right now, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. And drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to the beginning, because what happened that night inside Mercy General Hospital was not just about one nurse getting fired. It was about a secret that the United States government had been keeping for 3 years. And it all started with a man no one was supposed to recognize. The shift should have been ordinary. That was the thing Ava Harper kept coming back to, weeks later when she tried to make sense of it all. Tuesday nights at Mercy General were supposed to be the quiet ones. Not slow. Nothing in a level 2 trauma center was ever truly slow, but manageable. The kind of shift where you move through your rounds with your eyes half open, where the worst thing you expected to deal with was a broken wrist from a bar fight or a middle-aged man who had waited too long to come in about chest pain. She had been a nurse for 11 months. 11 months since she graduated. 11 months since she walked away from the one career she had actually trained for. The one that had shaped every instinct she had. The one she never talked about at work. She had her reasons for leaving. She kept those reasons tucked behind her sternum, quiet, like a stone she had learned to breathe around. She clocked in at 7 that evening, pulled her dark hair back, checked the board, and started her rounds. 2 post-op patients on the 2nd floor, one elderly woman waiting on labs, a teenager with a sprained ankle who was far more dramatic about it than the situation required. Normal, manageable, hers. She was on her way back from the supply room, arms full of saline bags, when the ambulance bay doors slammed open. Not opened, slammed. The kind of force that made the whole frame shudder. 2 paramedics came in fast, the gurney between them moving at a pace that told her everything before they said a single word. The man on the gurney was large, not just tall, built, broad through the shoulders in a way that even lying flat, even pale and barely conscious, made him look like someone who had never once been the smallest person in any room. He was wearing civilian clothes, dark jacket, dark jeans, no ID visible. His face was turned slightly to one side, and there was blood, a lot of it, soaking through the left side of his jacket. "GSW, left flank," the paramedic called out. He was found in the parking structure on 5th. No wallet, no phone. BP is dropping. We've got a weak pulse, 60 over 40 and falling. Ava stepped to the side automatically, clearing the path, watching. Dr. Renee Calloway came out of Bay 3 at a controlled jog, snapping on gloves. Renee was a good doctor, steady, experienced. She had a way of moving through a trauma room that was almost choreographed, efficient and calm, nothing wasted. But Ava watched her stop at the side of the gurney, just for a second. Less than a second, really. A fraction of a pause that most people would not have noticed. But Ava noticed. Renee looked at the man's face and something moved across her expression. Not recognition exactly, more like the ghost of it, like she was trying very hard not to recognize something she recognized. "Bay 1, Renee said, and her voice was a little too flat. "Let's move." Ava followed them in. She was not assigned to Bay 1 that night, but the charge nurse, Patricia, was in the middle of a phone call, and the other 2 floor nurses were tied up. So Ava grabbed gloves and moved into the space without waiting to be asked. That was how she worked. She moved toward the problem, not away from it. She started cutting away the jacket while Renee called out orders. Fluids, type and cross. Get imaging on standby. The jacket came apart in 2 cuts, and Ava got her first real look at the wound. She went still. Not outwardly. Outwardly, she kept her hands moving, pressing gauze, applying pressure exactly where it needed to go. But something shifted in her brain, quick and cold and precise. The entry wound was wrong. Not wrong in a medical sense. It was a clean wound. The bullet had not fragmented. The angle suggested it had been fired from distance. Wrong in the specific sense that Ava had been trained, in another life, to read bodies the way other people read faces. The man on this table had been shot by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The placement was deliberate. Not kill shot deliberate, survivable deliberate. As if whoever pulled the trigger wanted this man found, wanted him brought somewhere, wanted him alive but damaged. She did not say any of that out loud. She looked at his left forearm, partially exposed now where she had cut away the sleeve to get to the IV site. There was a tattoo there, a small one almost hidden in the crease of his inner wrist. A grim reaper, minimalist, just a few lines. But beneath the reaper, in letters so small you would only see them if you were looking, were 3 numbers. Ava's hands did not stop moving, but her mind was sprinting. She had seen that tattoo before. Not on this man. She had never seen this man in her life. But she had seen that tattoo, those numbers, on 3 other men. 3 other men she had met in a very different context, in a very different place, in the years before she became a nurse at Mercy General. She pressed harder on the gauze. The man's BP was still dropping. "He's not stabilizing," she said, keeping her voice level. "The bleed is deeper than it looks. The wound track is—" "I see it," Renee said, not looking up. "He needs a pressure pack, not just surface gauze. The angle of entry suggests—" "Harper," Renee's voice was quiet, final. "I have it." Ava pressed her lips together and kept her hands where they were. That was when Director Gerald Holt walked into the bay. She had not seen him come in. He had a way of appearing, not walking, appearing, that she had never gotten used to in 11 months. Gerald Holt was 61 years old, silver-haired, and had run Mercy General for the last 9 years with the kind of authority that left no room for negotiation. He was not a bad man. She had thought, at various points in her tenure, that he might even be a fair one. But fair and good were not always the same thing, and the look on his face right now was neither. He looked at the patient. He looked at Renee. Then he looked at Ava. "Who authorized a second nurse in this bay?" he said. "Patricia was unavailable, sir," Ava said. "The patient needed immediate—" "Step back." She did not step back. Not because she was making a statement, not because she was trying to challenge him, but because the man on the table had just made a sound, a low, strained, barely there sound, and his blood pressure on the monitor had dropped again, and her hands were the only things between the gauze and the wound, and if she stepped back right now, she was certain, absolutely certain, that he would bleed out in the next 4 minutes. "Sir," she said, "with respect, if I move my hands right now—" "I said step back, Harper." "His pressure is 55/30. The bleed is—" "Dr. Calloway has it under control." Renee was already moving in, already reaching for the position Ava was holding. Their eyes met for one instant. Renee said, "Please just do what he says." Ava said something back that she could not quite name. Not defiance, exactly. More like grief. The grief of someone who knew what was going to happen and could not stop it. She stepped back, for 3 seconds. Then the monitor screamed. The man's pressure crashed, 40/20. The room went loud in an instant. Renee calling out, the tech moving, someone grabbing the crash cart. And in that chaos, in that 3-second window where every eye in the room was somewhere else, Ava stepped back in. She did not think about it. That was the honest truth. She did not make a decision, did not weigh consequences, did not calculate risk. Her body moved because her training moved it. Her hands found the wound, and she applied a pressure pack. A specific technique, a specific placement, one that she had been taught in a context that had nothing to do with hospital nursing, and the bleeding slowed, and then stopped. The monitor stabilized. 55/40, 60/45. The room breathed. Renee looked at her hands, then at Ava, then at the monitor. Something passed across her face that was too complicated to name. Gerald Holt was very quiet. He waited until the patient was stable. He waited until the tech had finished the IV line and Renee had issued the orders and the immediate crisis had passed. He waited, and in that waiting, the air in the bay became something dense and difficult to move through. Then he said very softly, "Everyone except Dr. Calloway, out." Ava stripped her gloves. She walked out of Bay 1 into the corridor, and she stood there, and she waited, because she already knew what was coming. She had known it the moment she stepped back in. She had made a choice with open eyes, and she did not regret it. And she was going to have to pay for it, and all three of those things were equally true. Holt came out less than 2 minutes later. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Around them, the night shift had gone still. Nurses at their stations, a tech in the hallway, the receptionist at the front desk, all trying to look like they were not watching while watching with every available sense. "You were given a direct order," Holt said. "Yes, sir." "You disregarded it. The patient was bleeding out." "That is not your call to make. That is the attending physician's call to make." The attending physician needed another pair of hands. His jaw tightened. "You have been on my staff for 11 months. In those 11 months, I have received 3 separate incident reports about your tendency to exceed the scope of your assigned role. I have let them pass. I told myself you were new, that you were still learning the structure of how this hospital operates." He paused. "I was wrong about you." She looked at him steadily. She did not flinch. She had been trained not to flinch. "The technique you used," he said, and his voice shifted slightly, not softer but more careful, more watchful. "Where did you learn it?" "Nursing school," she said. It was not exactly a lie. It was also not exactly the truth. He looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he turned to face the hallway, where every member of the night shift was now openly watching. "Ms. Harper's employment at Mercy General is terminated, effective immediately," he said, not loudly. He did not need to be loud. "She is to be escorted from the premises. She is not to return to any patient care area. Is that understood?" The hallway was silent. Ava looked at none of them. She looked at the floor of Bay 1, just visible through the open door, where the man whose life she had just saved was lying stable and unconscious, on a table he would not have been on if she had followed orders. She went to her locker. She took her bag. She did not cry, because she was not, at that moment, sad. She was something harder than sad, and quieter than angry. Something that lived in the space between a decision you made and the consequences you accepted. She put on her coat. She walked back through the hallway toward the main exit. She was almost to the door when she heard it, the red phone. There were 3 phones at the central nurses' station, the internal line, the general external line, and the red one. The red phone was the emergency line, the direct connection line, the one that in 9 years at Mercy General had rung, according to Patricia, exactly twice. Once during a mass casualty event 4 years ago. Once when the governor's office needed to reach the chief of surgery. It rang now. The receptionist, a young woman named Dana, looked at it the way you looked at something that was not supposed to move when it moved. She picked it up on the second ring, said her standard greeting, and then went completely silent. Ava stopped walking. She did not know why she stopped. There was no reason to stop. She had been fired. She was leaving. Whatever was happening at that desk had nothing to do with her anymore. But she stopped. Dana's face had gone the color of copy paper. Her hand holding the receiver was not quite shaking, but it was working not to. She looked up, found Holt, who was still standing in the hallway, and said in a voice barely above a whisper, "Sir, I think you need to take this." "Who is it?" Holt said. Dana swallowed. "They say they're calling from the Pentagon." The word landed like something dropped from a height. Heavy, wrong sounding in the middle of a hospital hallway. Holt's expression did not change, which meant his expression had gone somewhere it couldn't be read. "That's not," he started. "They're asking for the director by name, sir. They say it's regarding a patient who was brought in tonight." Dana's voice dropped further. "And they're asking for a nurse named Ava Harper." The entire hallway turned. Every face, every pair of eyes. Ava stood at the exit door, her coat on, her bag over her shoulder, one hand on the push bar, and felt the weight of that name, her own name, said in that context, in that tone, settle over her like weather. Holt crossed to the desk in 4 strides. He took the receiver. He said very crisply, "This is Director Gerald Holt." He listened for approximately 8 seconds. Then the color in his face did something Ava had never seen it do in 11 months. It dropped. Not gradually, all at once, like a curtain cut from its rod. He did not speak for a long time. When he finally said something, it was only 3 words, and his voice came out different than she had ever heard it. Smaller, stripped of that controlled authority that was so much a part of who he was, that she had started to think it was just his voice, his natural register. He said, "Yes, sir, immediately." He put the receiver down. He turned and looked at Ava. She had not moved from the door. Neither of them spoke. Around them, the night shift of Mercy General Hospital held its breath. The techs, the nurses, the orderly by the elevator, Dana behind her desk with both hands flat on the counter. All of them watching a moment none of them had the context to understand. Holt's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Miss Harper," he said, and for the first time in 11 months, the word did not sound like a dismissal or a correction or a management decision. It sounded like something else entirely, like someone trying to say a name they suddenly weren't sure they knew. "Don't," he stopped, cleared his throat. "Don't leave the building." Ava looked at him. She looked at the door. She looked at the floor of Bay 1, still visible down the hall, where the man with the Grim Reaper tattoo was breathing steadily on a table he should not have survived. And she took her hand off the push bar. She did not know yet what was coming. She did not know about the black SUV that was already pulling off the interstate onto the surface roads toward Mercy General. She did not know about the man in the gray suit who would walk through the ambulance bay doors in 37 minutes and ask for her by a name she had not used in 3 years. She did not know what the patient in Bay 1 actually was. Not who, not yet, but what. Or what it would mean that she had saved him. She did not know any of it. But 11 months ago, when she had taken off one uniform and put on another, she had told herself that the part of her life that required her to stand in hallways like this one, waiting for the things she could not see coming, was over. Standing at the exit door of Mercy General Hospital at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, one hand still warm from the push bar she had just released, Ava Harper understood, with the calm certainty of someone who had been here before, that she had been wrong. Ava did not move from the spot where she was standing. She had taken her hand off the push bar, and now she just stood there, coat still on, bag still over her shoulder, while the rest of the night shift tried very hard to pretend they were not watching her. They were all watching her. Dana had both hands pressed flat on the desk like she needed something solid to hold on to. 2 nurses at the far end of the hallway were whispering, their eyes moving back and forth between Ava and the director, like they were watching a tennis match they hadn't expected to attend tonight. Gerald Holt was still standing at the central desk. He had not moved either. He was looking at the phone receiver he had just set down, as if it had said something to him in a language he did not yet speak. Then he looked up at Ava, and for the first time in 11 months, the man did not seem entirely sure of himself. That alone told her more than the phone call had. "Come with me," he said. Not a request, but also, and this was the part that caught her attention, not quite the command he usually deployed. There was something underneath it, something careful, something that had not been there 20 minutes ago. GDK, he had slammed her into a supply cart, GDK, front of her colleagues, and told her she did not exist. She followed him into his office without a word. He closed the door of GDK them. He did not sit down. He stood in the center of the room with his arms at his sides, and he looked at her the way a man looks at a chess piece he has just realized is not what he thought it was. The Pentagon, he said. I heard, Ava said. They asked for you by name. I heard that too. He paused. Is there something you would like to tell me? She looked at him steadily. Is there something you would like to ask me? His jaw tightened. She watched him work through something internally. She could see it moving across his face, the calculation, the frustration, the particular discomfort of a man who was used to holding all the information in a room, discovering that he was not, in fact, holding all the information in this room. Who are you? He said finally. It was a strange question to ask someone who had worked for you for 11 months, but it was the right question, and they both knew it. I'm a nurse, Ava said. I was a nurse. You fired me 40 minutes ago. Don't, his voice went sharp. Do not be cute with me right now. The Pentagon called this hospital on an emergency line and asked for you by name in connection with an unidentified patient who came in with a gunshot wound and a blood type I have never seen flagged the way his was flagged in our system. Someone put a priority code on that man's file before he even arrived. Who does that? Who has the clearance to do that? Ava said nothing. The man on the phone told me to keep you in this building, Holt said. He used words that people do not use unless they mean them. He used words like national security, like federal jurisdiction, like your cooperation is expected and your non-cooperation will be noted. He spread his hands. So I will ask you again, and I would very much like an honest answer this time. Who are you? The clock on his wall read 11:53. Ava set her bag down on the chair beside her. She took her coat off and folded it over the back of the same chair. And then she said, very quietly, I think you should let me back into Bay 1. Holt stared at her. Whatever they told you on that phone, she said, they told you for a reason. That man is alive right now because of a technique that is not in any standard nursing curriculum in this country. You know that. You asked me where I learned it, and I didn't give you a real answer, and you knew I wasn't giving you a real answer. So let's stop doing this. She met his eyes. Let me back in that bay. He was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up his desk phone and called the charge nurse station. Patricia, reinstate Harper's access. Bay 1. Effective now. He paused, listened. His expression said that Patricia had asked a question he did not want to answer. Because I said so, he said, and hung up. He looked at Ava. This conversation isn't finished. I know, she said. She picked up her bag and left his office. The hallway had not exactly returned to normal. It had achieved a kind of false normal. People moving, clipboards being carried from one place to another, the surface appearance of a shift proceeding as it should. But the energy underneath it was entirely different. Whispers had been exchanged. Theories were forming. Dana had told at least 2 people about the phone call. Because Dana was 23 years old and had no defenses against the shock of something extraordinary. And Ava couldn't blame her for it. She pushed open the door to Bay 1. Renee Calloway was still there. She looked up when Ava walked in, and her expression went through 3 things in rapid succession. Surprise, relief, and then something more guarded, something protective. Holt reinstated you? Renee said. For now, Ava said. She moved to the bedside. The patient was still unconscious. His vitals had stabilized, but not climbed. He was in that precarious middle space where stable didn't mean safe, just meant not actively dying. She checked the IV line, checked the wound dressing. Then she looked at the tattoo on his inner wrist again. The Grim Reaper. The three numbers. "Renee," she said without looking up. "Yeah? Did you flag his file before he came in?" A beat of silence. One beat too long. "The paramedics flagged it," Renee said. "That's not what I asked." Another silence. Ava turned and looked at her. Renee was a 44-year-old attending physician who had worked trauma medicine for 16 years. She was not easily rattled. Right now she looked rattled. "I need you to tell me something," Ava said, "not as a colleague, not as my supervisor, as the person who paused for half a second when this man was rolled to the door and then acted like she hadn't." She kept her voice even. "Do you know who he is?" Renee looked at the door, looked at the patient, looked at Ava. "No," she said, and then quieter, "but I know what that tattoo means." The monitor beeped. Steady, patient and steady. "So do I," Ava said. They looked at each other across the bed, across the unconscious body of a man who had been shot with professional precision and left in a parking structure to be found. And the weight of what neither of them was saying filled the space between them like pressure before a storm. "The Pentagon called," Renee said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes. For you." "Yes." Renee exhaled through her nose. "Ava," she stopped, started again. Should I be?" She couldn't seem to find the end of the sentence. "You should keep doing your job," Ava said. "You should keep him stable, and you should not discuss his file with anyone who doesn't have direct patient care responsibility for him tonight. And if anyone comes into this bay who is not hospital staff," she paused, "come find me first." Renee nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. Just that. Okay. Because she was a smart woman who understood, in the way that smart people sometimes understood things without needing all the words, that the ground had shifted, and the best thing to do when the ground shifts is to find your footing before you try to move. Ava pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down. She was not on the clock. She had been fired, reinstated, and was technically in a liminal state of employment that probably had no official category in the hospital's HR handbook. But none of that mattered right now, because the man in the bed was the only thing that mattered, and she needed to be in this room, and so she was in this room. She watched his face. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, she guessed. The kind of face that had been weathered not by age, but by exposure, to conditions, to choices, to the particular erosion that came from spending years doing things that couldn't be discussed at dinner tables. She had known men with faces like this. She had worked alongside them. She had trusted some of them with her life, and they had trusted her with theirs. And then one day she had decided that she was done with that world, and she had left it. And she had spent 11 months convincing herself that leaving had been the right call. She was considerably less convinced of that right now. His hand moved, just slightly, a twitch, really, the fingers on his right hand curling and then releasing. But it was deliberate, not a reflex. She had seen enough unconscious patients to know the difference between a body's random electrical noise and a body trying to communicate. She leaned forward. "Hey," she said quietly, "you're in a hospital. You're safe. Don't try to move." His eyes did not open, but his fingers moved again. This time she saw it clearly, 2 fingers, extending and contracting. A pattern, slow, deliberate. She felt the breath leave her body. She knew that pattern. She had not seen it in 3 years, had not thought about it in at least 2, had told herself on more than one occasion that she had successfully archived it in the part of her brain where things went when you were done with them. But the body remembered what the brain tried to forget, and her body recognized that signal the way it recognized her own name. It was a code, a specific unit-level, nonverbal communication protocol that was not taught in any nursing school in the country. Her hands were steady when she reached over and pressed 2 fingers against his palm. She returned the signal. Once, twice. The acknowledgement sequence. His fingers went still. His breathing changed. Not much. Not dramatically, but enough. The rhythm of it shifted in a way that only happened when a trained person decided, consciously, to hold something back. To wait. He knew she was there. He knew she understood. Ava sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for approximately 3 seconds, which was all the time she allowed herself before pulling her attention back to the floor, back to the room, back to the very immediate and practical problem of what was happening and what was coming. Because something was coming. The Pentagon did not call civilian hospitals on emergency lines for ordinary situations. They did not ask for specific nurses by name unless those nurses were known quantities, known in a context that had nothing to do with nursing. And the man in this bed had been shot in a way that was surgical, deliberate, and traceable only to someone who had access to a very specific kind of operational intelligence. Someone had wanted him found. Someone had wanted him brought here, to this hospital, on this night. The question was whether that someone was on the same side as the Pentagon. Patricia knocked on the bay door at 12:19. Ava, her voice was carefully neutral, which meant she was working hard to make it that way. There's someone at the ambulance bay entrance asking for the director. What do they look like? Ava said. Patricia blinked. That wasn't the standard follow-up question. Plain clothes, gray suit. He came in a black SUV, Ava said. Patricia's mouth closed, then opened. How did you? Tell Director Holt, Ava said, standing, and tell him I said not to let that man pass the waiting area until I get there. Ava, you can't just, you're not even technically, Patricia. She said it gently but without any give in it. Please. Patricia looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who was updating their mental file on a person they thought they knew. Then she nodded and walked away without another word. Renee was looking at Ava from across the room. You knew someone was coming, she said. Not accusatory, just working it out. I suspected, Ava said. Is he going to be okay? Renee asked. She wasn't asking about the man in the suit. Ava looked at the patient, at his steady vitals, at his hand, still and quiet now, against the white of the hospital sheet. He's going to be fine, she said, as long as nobody else touches him tonight. She left the bay and walked down the hall toward the ambulance entrance, and she had the very specific sensation of a door she had locked a long time ago swinging open on its own hinges, in the dark, without a key. The man in the gray suit was standing just inside the ambulance bay entrance. He was younger than she'd expected, early 30s maybe, clean cut in a way that was deliberate rather than natural. The kind of clean cut that came from training, from discipline, from years of making sure you look like exactly what you wanted people to think you were, which in this case appeared to be someone completely unremarkable. He was very good at it. Most people would have walked past him without a second look. Ava was not most people. He saw her coming down the hall, and something in his posture changed. Barely perceptible, just a slight shift in weight, a fractional adjustment in the set of his shoulders. Recognition. He had been expecting her, but knowing something is coming and watching it actually arrive were two different things, and his body had reacted to the gap between them. Ms. Harper, he said. That's one of my names, she said. That landed. She watched it land. He absorbed it without visibly reacting, which told her he was good, but his eyes moved to hers and stayed there with a new intensity that told her he was now paying a different quality of attention. My name is Daniel Reeves, he said. I'm a liaison with the Department of Defense. I've been sent here in connection with a patient currently in Bay 1. I know why you're here, Ava said. Then you know we need to talk. We are talking. Somewhere private. She looked at him. The patient's condition is critical enough that I shouldn't be far from that bay. So we talk here, or we talk in the hallway outside Bay 1. Those are the options. Reeves looked over his shoulder at the entrance behind him, then back at her. Hallway outside Bay 1, he said. They walked side by side through the corridor, and Ava was aware of every set of eyes they passed. Dana, two nurses she knew by face but not well, an orderly who had definitely figured out something unusual was happening and had slowed his mopping to half speed to extend his proximity to the action. Outside Bay 1, Reeves stopped. He did not produce any identification, which told her either he trusted her to take his word for it, or he knew she already knew more than a business card was going to tell her. "The patient's name is classified," he said, keeping his voice below what the ambient hallway noise would carry. "What I can tell you is that he is an active asset, high value. His presence in this city tonight was not sanctioned, and the people who put that bullet in him are aware that he's here." "Are they aware he's alive?" Ava said. Reeves paused. "Not yet." "How long before that changes?" "That depends on how well this hospital contains the information, which is why I'm here." He looked at her directly. "We need a medical presence inside that room that can be trusted to report only to us and not to anyone inside this facility's chain of command." "You want me to watch him?" she said. "We want more than that," Reeves said. "We need to know if anyone on this staff makes contact with someone outside the hospital in relation to this patient. We need to know if anyone accesses his file who shouldn't, and we need to know immediately if his condition changes in any direction." He paused. "You are uniquely positioned to do all three of those things." Ava looked at the door of Bay 1. "Director Holt fired me tonight," she said. "Director Holt has been informed that your employment status at this facility is being temporarily superseded by federal authority," Reeves said. He was not happy about it. "He's never happy about things he didn't decide," Ava said. "What aren't you telling me?" Reeves was quiet for exactly the wrong length of time, the kind of quiet that was an answer in itself. "The asset," Ava said, and her voice had gone flat and careful, the voice she used when she needed to speak in a way that could not be misread. "He didn't just end up in this hospital by chance. Someone directed him here, or directed someone else to bring him here." She watched Reeves's face. "And the reason you need someone inside that room is because you're not sure the threat is outside the building." Reeves looked at her. "I need you to understand what you're agreeing to," he said. "If you're right, and we have reason to believe you are, then there are people inside this hospital right now who know who that patient is, who made contact with the people who shot him, and who are waiting for an opportunity to finish the job." He let that sit for a moment. "You would be the only thing standing between that patient and another attempt tonight." Ava looked at the bay door one more time. Past it, she could hear the quiet rhythm of the monitor. Steady. Patient. She thought about the signal he had sent with his fingers. She thought about 3 years ago and the things she had walked away from, and the reasons she had given herself for walking away. She thought about Gerald Holt's hand on her wrist, and the way the room had gone still, and the way nobody had said a word. Then she turned back to Daniel Reeves and said, "I'm going to need my access fully restored. Every floor, every file, every room in this building, and I need it done in the next 10 minutes. Reeves pulled out his phone. "Done," he said. "And Reeves," she said, and something in her voice made him look up from the phone. "If there's someone on this staff who's already made contact with whoever sent that shooter, I need you to let me find them. Don't send your people in yet. If they move too fast, whoever it is goes quiet and we lose the thread." He looked at her for a long moment. "You know how to run this kind of operation," he said. It was not quite a question. "I know how to keep a patient alive," she said. "Everything else is just what comes with it." She pushed open the door to Bay 1 and walked back in. The patient was still. The monitor was steady. Renee was at the workstation in the corner, entering notes, her back to the door. And Ava settled into the chair beside the bed, set her bag on the floor, and began, quietly and without any announcement, to watch. Not just the patient, not just the monitors, but the room, the door, the hallway visible through the small window in the upper panel, the staff moving past it, the faces, the patterns, The micro behaviors that people did not know they were broadcasting. She had been trained to read a room like this, to hold still and let information come to her rather than chasing it, to find the thing that did not fit. 2 nurses came in over the next 40 minutes, both assigned, both expected, both moving the way people moved when they had nothing to hide. She noted them without reacting. An orderly brought fresh linens. A tech came to update the IV drip. And then, at 1:17 in the morning, a person came to the door who had no business being there. Dr. Warren Hale, senior cardiologist, 58 years old, 15-year tenure at Mercy General, 2 commendations from the board of directors. He had no patient in Bay 1. He had no assignment on this floor tonight. He stopped in the doorway, and his eyes went straight to the patient and stayed there for 3 full seconds before he registered that Ava was sitting in the chair beside the bed, watching him. His face did a complicated thing. "Wrong bay," he said, quickly, too quickly. "Happens to everyone," Ava said. He left. She waited until his footsteps faded down the hallway. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and sent a single text to the number Reeves had given her before she walked back into the bay. 3 words. "I found one." Reeves read her text in 43 seconds. She knew because she was watching the door when his reply came back. Not a text, but a call. Direct, no greeting, his voice lower than it had been in the hallway 2 hours ago. "Which one?" he said. "Hale, senior cardiology, no assignment on this floor tonight, no patient in this bay, came to the door at 1:17 and looked at our guy for 3 full seconds before he realized I was sitting right there." "What did he do when he saw you?" "Said wrong bay, left fast." A pause. She could hear him thinking. "Has he come back?" "Not yet." "Don't move on him," Reeves said. "Not yet. If he's the contact, we need to know who he's talking to outside the building. The moment you spook him, that thread goes cold." "I know," Ava said. "That's why I texted instead of following him into the hallway." Another pause, shorter. "I'll have someone pull his phone records." Quietly. Then, "How's the patient?" She looked at the bed. "Stable. Stronger than an hour ago, actually. His pressure is coming up." "Has he been conscious?" She thought about the signal, the fingers, the pattern she had not thought about in 3 years pressing itself back into her like a thumb into clay. "Not in any way the monitors would show," she said carefully. Reeves understood what that meant. She could tell by the quality of his silence. "Keep me posted," he said, and ended the call. Ava set the phone down on her knee and looked at the patient. His face was still, but his breathing had continued to change over the last hour, settling into a rhythm that was too controlled to be unconscious sleep and too quiet to be anything other than deliberate. He was maintaining the appearance of unconsciousness the way a person maintained it when they needed the room to believe it. She had done it herself, once, in a situation she didn't revisit often. She leaned forward and said, very quietly, close enough that the words wouldn't carry past the curtain, "I know you can hear me. I'm not going to ask you to respond, but I need you to know that there is at least one compromised staff member in this building, and I am the only person standing between you and another attempt tonight. So whatever you know that I don't, when you're ready, I'm right here." His hand did not move, but his breathing changed. A single, fractional deepening of one breath. The kind of thing that meant, received. She sat back. At 1:34 in the morning, Patricia appeared in the doorway with the expression of a woman who had not signed up for whatever this night had become. "Holt wants you," she said. "Tell him I can't leave the patient." "Ava!" Patricia's jjigae varied the weight of someone who had jjigae fielding impossible requests for the last 6 hours. "He's been on the phone with someone from Washington for the last 40 minutes. He came out of his office looking like he'd aged 10 years. He said if you won't come to him, he's coming here." "Tell him to come here then," Ava said. "I mean that. He should be in this bay anyway." Patricia opened her mouth, reconsidered whatever she was going to say, and left. 3 minutes later, Gerald Holt walked through the door of Bay 1. He had aged 10 years. Patricia had not been exaggerating. The authority was still there. It was structural in him, part of the way he carried his spine, but the certainty underneath it had shifted. He looked like a man who had been told that the building he had lived in for 9 years was constructed on ground he had never actually understood. He looked at the patient. He looked at Ava. He pulled the second chair in the room to the bedside and sat down without being invited, which was the first genuinely human thing she had ever seen him do. "They told me his name," Holt said, low, almost careful, like the name itself was fragile. Ava waited. "They told me what he is, what he does." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been running this hospital for 9 years. I've had politicians in here, a governor, twice, a federal judge. I thought I understood what it meant when someone important came through those doors." He shook his head slightly. "I didn't understand anything." "Most people don't," Ava said. "That's by design." He looked at her sideways. "You did. I recognized a tattoo." "That's not all you recognized." She didn't answer that. Holt leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for the first time she saw something genuine on his face. Not anger, not authority, not the performed competence of a man protecting his institution. Something closer to fear. The honest, unwelcome kind. "They told me there may be someone on my staff," he said. "Yes." "Do you know who?" She considered him, considered how much to give. "I have a lead," she said. "I need you to do something that's going to be very difficult for you." "What?" "Nothing," she said. "I need you to do absolutely nothing. Go back to your office. Behave exactly the way you would behave on any other night. Don't pull anyone's schedule. Don't look at anyone's file. Don't make any calls about this patient to anyone who isn't already in this room. Can you do that?" His jaw worked. She watched him fight the instinct to manage, to intervene, to be the one making the decisions. It was a genuine struggle. She respected him slightly more for the fact that she could see it was. "Yes," he said. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it. He stood, looked at the patient one more time. "He's going to make it?" "I think so." Holt nodded once. He walked to the door and then stopped with his hand on the frame. Without turning around, he said, "I owe you an apology for earlier. What I did in front of the staff was..." He stopped. "It wasn't right." Ava looked at the back of his head. "Get some sleep if you can," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He left. The monitor beeped, patient and steady. The hallway outside the bay window was quiet. A Tuesday night at nearly 2 in the morning, the building settling into its deep shift rhythm, the fluorescent hum of the corridor, the only constant sound. Ava pulled her chair 2 inches closer to the bed. She checked the IV line, checked the wound dressing, looked at his face. His eyes were open. Not just open, focused, looking directly at her with the particular quality of attention that belonged to someone who had not been unconscious for the last 2 hours, but had been making careful use of the time. She did not react. She had learned a long time ago that the moments when you most wanted to react were exactly the moments when you couldn't afford to. "Hey," she said, the same words she had said to him hours ago, same tone. "Don't move fast. You've got a pressure dressing on your left flank, and your blood pressure is still below where I want it." He looked at the ceiling, took one breath. Then he said in a voice that was rough and low, but perfectly controlled, "How many?" She understood immediately. "At least one confirmed, possibly more. I'm working on it." His eyes moved back to her face. Something in them shifted. An assessment, quick and thorough, the kind of look that took inventory of a person in the time it took most people to blink. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him, because he exhaled and let some of the tension go from the muscles along his jaw. "You're not just a nurse," he said. "I'm absolutely a nurse," she said. "I'm also other things. The technique you used, the pressure pack. Field medicine, she said. Old training. Which unit? She looked at him. That's not a conversation we're having right now. Right now the conversation we're having is, how did you end up in a parking structure on 5th Street with a professional-grade entry wound and no ID? His jaw tightened. I was coming in. Coming in where? Here. His eyes held hers. This hospital was the meet point. I was supposed to come in through the ER as a walk-in. Controlled. Clean. There was a contact inside. He paused. Someone got to the schedule. They knew which entrance I'd use. Ava felt the cold clarity of it settle through her. The shooter was waiting for you. Outside the parking structure, I made it to the 4th floor before I went down. And the contact inside the hospital, she said, the one who was supposed to meet you, do you know who it was? He was quiet for a beat. Calloway, he said. The name landed like something solid in the middle of her chest. She kept her face still, kept her hands still. Renee Calloway, the attending physician, the woman who had paused when he was rolled in, the woman who had stood across that bed from her for the better part of the night and said, I know what that tattoo means. She was your inside contact, Ava said. She's been a DOD asset for 6 years, he said. Embedded civilian. This hospital was her station. Was, Ava said. His eyes were very steady. Is there a reason you're using past tense? And that was when the monitor beside him changed. Not the cardiac readout, the secondary monitor. The one tracking the IV drip rate. It dropped. Fast. From the correct rate to something wrong. Too fast. Too much. The numbers climbing in a direction that meant someone had adjusted the drip remotely or physically. And either way, it was not an accident. Ava was out of the chair before she had consciously decided to move. She reached the IV stand and clamped a line in one motion, stopping the flow. She looked at the drip chamber. The fluid level was wrong. Not the saline that should have been there, but something else. Something with a slightly different viscosity, catching the light differently. Someone had switched the bag. She looked at the door. The orderly who had brought fresh linens at 12:40. She had noted him. She had assessed him and moved on because his behavior had been unremarkable. But the linen cart sat in the hallway for 11 minutes, which was 4 minutes longer than it needed to be. And she had let that go because she had been focused on Hale. She had been looking at the wrong person. Don't move, she said to the patient, low and urgent. I mean that. Do not move your arm. She checked his line, checked his vitals, checked the readouts. Whatever had been in the bag, the clamp had stopped it fast enough. His pressure was elevated now, a spike of reaction, his body registering the foreign substance, but not crashing. She grabbed her phone, Gac Reeves. He picked up in 2 rings. The IV was tampered with, she said. Someone switched the bag. I caught it, he's okay. But I need you in this building right now. And I need you to find an orderly, male, 5'10", dark hair, was pushing a linen cart on this floor between 12:40 and 12:51. She heard Reeves moving, the sound of a vehicle door. I'm in the parking lot, he said. I've been here since 1 o'clock. You've been in the parking lot this whole time. I told you I'd be close. She would have felt something about that, gratitude maybe, or the particular relief of knowing backup was actually where it said it was. But she didn't have the bandwidth for it right now. There's something else, she said. The patient gave me his inside contact, Renee Calloway. Reeves was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. She's DOD. He says she's the asset who was supposed to meet him tonight. Where is she now? Ava looked through the bay window at the hallway. It was empty. I don't know, she said. She was here an hour ago. I need to find her. Do not leave that patient, Reeves said. I'm coming in. She ended the call and looked at the man in the bed. He was watching her with those steady, exhausted eyes, and she could see the effort it was costing him to stay awake, to stay present, to keep functioning on a body that had been through what his body had been through tonight. Renee Calloway is your contact, she said, and someone on this staff knows she's your contact. They switched your IV bag, which means they have access to this floor, and they know exactly who you are. She met his eyes. The person I flagged earlier, Hale, the cardiologist, I think I may have been pointed at him deliberately to keep me focused in the wrong direction while someone else had access to your room. He closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, something had shifted in his face. Not fear. She had the impression that fear was not an emotion this man spent much time with. More like the recognition of a miscalculation. The look of someone running a sequence backward, finding the error, accepting it. Hale is clean, he said. You know him. He was flagged as a potential contact 2 months ago. We cleared him. He exhaled. Someone knew we cleared him. Someone put him in your line of sight tonight, knowing you'd key on him. Which means whoever is actually running this inside the hospital knew enough about the operation to know which names would distract a trained observer, Ava said. Yes, that's a short list of people. Very short, he said. 3 people knew Hale had been cleared. Myself, my handler at DOD, and the person who ran the clearance investigation. Ava looked at the empty IV bag, still hanging from the stand. She looked at the door. She thought about the 11 minutes the linen cart had sat in the hallway, and the orderly who had moved at exactly the right pace to be invisible, and the way the night had been structured to keep her looking left while something happened on the right. The person who ran the clearance investigation, she said, is that person in this building tonight? He looked at her, and the door to Bay 1 opened. Reeves came in fast, 2 other men behind him, both in the same plainclothes configuration that said Federal without saying it. He moved to the IV stand, looked at the compromised bag, looked at the patient, looked at Ava. He's okay, Ava said. I caught it in time, but we have a bigger problem. She was already thinking through the sequence, running it forward, trying to find the next move before it happened. Someone in this operation is double-sided, not just an informant, someone with clearance, someone who knew enough to construct a distraction that would work on a trained operative. Reeves looked at her carefully. What are you saying? I'm saying the leak isn't in this hospital, she said. The leak came in with you. The room went very still. One of the men behind Reeves, older, quieter, a presence she had registered when he walked in, and then filed and not returned to, shifted his weight. Barely. A 1/4-inch redistribution of balance that most people would never have caught. Ava caught it. She had been taught by people who understood the architecture of betrayal at a very specific level that the tell was never in the face. The face was practiced. The face was managed. The tell was always in the feet, in the weight, in the body's honest response to a moment of exposure. She did not look at the man directly. She kept her eyes on Reeves. But she said, calmly and without emphasis, Reeves, who else knew you were coming to this hospital tonight? Reeves frowned. My team, standard briefing. Who knew first, she said, before the briefing? Who made the call that brought you here? He opened his mouth, then he stopped, and she watched the same sequence of recognition move through him that had moved through her. Slower because he was closer to it, because it was harder to see the thing you had trusted. He turned to look at the older man. The older man's hand moved toward his jacket. Ava was already moving. She crossed the 4 feet between them in less time than it took the room to process what was happening. She caught the wrist, the right wrist, the one reaching, and she applied pressure at a specific point, a specific angle that she had been taught in a context that had nothing to do with nursing and everything to do with the years she had spent before she became a nurse. The man's hand opened. She stepped to the outside, controlled the arm, and put him against the wall with a force that was efficient rather than violent. Enough to stop the motion, enough to communicate that the motion was over. The room held its breath. The patient in the bed said nothing, but his eyes were open and watching with an expression that was the closest thing to satisfied she had seen on his face all night. Reeves had his hand inside his jacket too, but he had stopped. He was looking at Ava, at the man she had pinned, at the gun that had clattered to the floor, small, secondary weapon, the kind you kept for exactly this type of moment. And he was working through what he was seeing with the methodical discipline of a trained professional whose world had just rearranged itself. "His name," the patient said from the bed, rough voice, certain, "is Mitchell Crane. He ran the hail clearance. He's been running the other side of this operation for 14 months. Reeves looked at Mitchell Crane. Crane looked back at him. He was not struggling against Ava's hold. He was very still, very controlled, with the stillness of a man who had already accepted what the next several hours were going to look like and was deciding how to spend the time before they arrived. "I'd like a lawyer," Crane said. "You're going to need one," Reeves said. His voice had gone flat and cold in a way that Ava had not heard from him before. He reached into his jacket and produced a zip tie, the industrial kind that had nothing to do with standard federal issue and everything to do with a man who had come prepared for more contingencies than he'd admitted, and handed it to Ava without looking away from Crane. She used it efficiently and without commentary. Then she stepped back, checked her hands, and walked to the bedside. The patient was looking at the ceiling. His pressure on the monitor was elevated but holding. His breathing was measured. She checked the IV line, checked the clamp, looked at his face. "We need to get a clean bag going," she said, "and I need Renee Calloway found. If she's still in this building and she doesn't know that Crane was running the other side, she could be in danger." "Already on it," Reeves said. He had his phone to his ear. "We have people on every floor." Ava pulled the compromised IV bag and held it by the corner, evidence intact. "This needs to go to your team, not hospital disposal." "Understood." She looked at Crane, zip-tied, standing against the wall with the flat expression of a man converting himself into a problem for someone else to solve. She thought about the 14 months he had reportedly been working against his own operation. 14 months of misdirection, of constructed clearances, of pointing people like her at names like Hale, while the actual threat worked from inside the briefing room. "One question," she said to him. He looked at her. "The shooter in the parking structure, you called them." Crane said nothing. "You sent him there knowing the meet point had been moved to 5th Street, she said. "You knew the entrance, the timing, the route. You sent someone to finish it before he even got inside." She held his gaze. "He survived. I want you to understand that. All of that, and he survived." Crane's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes moved. Not remorse, not quite, but the specific discomfort of a man who had been very precise in his planning, confronting the single variable that had not gone according to plan. A rookie nurse who refused to step back. Reeves lowered his phone. "Calloway is on the 3rd floor. She's safe. My people have her." He exhaled. Something in him seemed to settle. Not relax, but find its footing again after the ground had shifted. He looked at Ava. "You said the lead came in with me. How long did you know?" "I didn't know," she said. "I suspected when I realized the distraction was too good, too specifically constructed. It required information that was operational, not just logistical. And you didn't say anything before you moved." "I said it when I was ready to move," she said. Saying it a minute earlier would have given him a minute to prepare. Reeves looked at her for a long moment. "Where did they find you?" he said. And it was the kind of question that didn't have a simple answer, and they both knew it. And neither of them pursued it further because there were other things that needed to happen in the next hour that were more urgent than her biography. She turned back to the patient. He was still watching the ceiling with those exhausted, steady eyes, and she could see now that the effort of staying conscious was costing him more than he was letting on. "Hey," she said, pulling the chair close. "You can stop performing now. Let the meds work." He looked at her. For the first time, the trained control in his face gave way to something underneath it. Something that was tired and human and not constructed for any audience. "Thank you," he said. It was 2 words, simple, unstated and understated in the way that only people who never said unnecessary things could make 2 words carry the full weight of a night. Get some rest, she said, for real this time. His eyes closed, and for the first time since the ambulance bay doors had slammed open at the beginning of the shift, the monitor beside him moved into a rhythm that was not just stable, but genuinely, cleanly, unremarkably normal. The rhythm of a person who was going to be okay. Ava sat back in her chair. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was steady. The room was quiet, and Crane was against the wall, and Reeves was on his phone, and somewhere on the 3rd floor, Renee Calloway was being walked through a version of the night that was going to take some time to fully absorb. Outside the bay window, the hallway of Mercy General at 2:49 in the morning was beginning, slowly, to look like a hospital again. Nurses moving, monitors beeping, the ordinary machinery of a place designed to keep people alive doing exactly what it was designed to do. Ava looked at the patient's face. Quiet now. Finally, genuinely quiet. She had come in at 7 o'clock for what was supposed to be an ordinary shift. She had been fired, reinstated, shoved against a supply cart, handed a covert operation, and come within 30 seconds of losing a man whose name she still did not officially know. She had found the inside threat. She had stopped the second attempt. She had identified the source of the leak from inside the federal team itself, and she had done all of it in scrubs, with a hospital ID badge that technically had her employment status listed as terminated for approximately 40 minutes in the middle of it all. She reached down and picked up the compromised IV bag from where she had set it at the foot of the bed. She turned it over in her hands, looking at the label that had been replaced with a nearly perfect forgery of the hospital's standard saline labeling. Nearly perfect. The font on the lot number was 1 point size too small, the kind of detail that a rushed person doing careful work would miss. She had not missed it. She never missed it. She set the bag down on the tray beside the bed, straightened the sheet across the patient's chest, and settled back into the chair. She was not going anywhere. The clock on the wall of Bay 1 read 3:11 in the morning when Renee Calloway walked through the door. She had 2 federal agents behind her, but she walked in front of them like she had chosen to come rather than been escorted. And the distinction mattered. Ava could see it in the way she carried herself, the deliberate straightness of her spine, the way she looked at the patient first and the room second, the way a person looked when they needed to confirm with their own eyes that the thing they had been protecting was still intact. He was still breathing. Renee's shoulders dropped exactly 1 centimeter. Then she looked at Ava. "I should have told you earlier," Renee said. "Yes," Ava said, "you should have. I couldn't verify who you were. My protocol said—" "I know what your protocol said." Ava stood up from the chair. Not aggressively, just to be eye level for what came next. "Your protocol also said to protect the asset at all costs. And the asset came within 30 seconds of a tampered IV bag while you were on the 3rd floor. So we can talk about protocol, or we can talk about what actually happened tonight. Your choice." Renee absorbed that without flinching. She was a composed woman, always had been. But there was something different in her composure now, stripped of the professional layer, down to something rawer underneath, something that looked a lot like guilt. "Who ran you?" Ava asked. "Crane," Renee said, and then she stopped. And the look on her face when she said his name was the look of someone who had been handed information they were still trying to integrate into a world that had made sense 5 minutes ago. It was always Crane. 6 years. He was the one who recruited me. He was the one who ran my assignments. He was the one who told me this hospital was my station. Her voice stayed level, but it cost her something to keep it that way. "He sent me here to protect the asset, and the whole time—" "He was the one who sent the shooter," Ava said. "Yes." The word fell into the room and nobody did anything with it for a moment. Reeves had stepped back against the wall, watching, letting it play out. He was good at that, reading when to push and when to let a thing run its own course. Ava had noticed that about him over the last several hours and had adjusted her read of him accordingly. He was more capable than his age suggested and more patient than his position usually required. "Renee," Ava said, and her voice changed slightly, not softer exactly, but less pressurized. "How long have you known who I was?" Renee looked at her steadily. "Since you used that pressure technique in Bay 1. I'd only ever seen that applied one other time, and the man who applied it had a very specific training background." She paused. "I didn't know your name. I knew your category." "My category," Ava repeated. "Embedded asset, medical cover, civilian placement." Renee glanced at the patient. "Same as me. Different handler, different unit, different operational chain, but the same fundamental architecture." She let that sit. "I didn't tell Crane I'd recognize you. That was the first thing I withheld from him in 6 years." "Why?" "Because if you were here and you weren't on his call sheet, it meant either you'd gone genuinely civilian, which the technique said you hadn't, or you were running a parallel track he didn't know about." She looked at Ava directly. "And if Crane didn't know about your track, I wanted to find out why before I said anything." Ava considered her. "You suspected him." "I suspected something," Renee said. "I didn't have a name for it yet. But when the asset came in through an entrance that only 3 people in the operation knew about, and he came in bleeding," she stopped. "You start doing the math. You did the math and you kept it to yourself." "I kept it to myself," Renee said, "and I called the number I was given for exactly this kind of situation. The number rang to the Pentagon, and the Pentagon sent Reeves." She paused. "They also gave them your name." Ava looked at Reeves. He nodded once. "She made the call at 10:53 tonight, before the ambulance even arrived. She saw the flag on the incoming patient file and she called it in." He paused. "We already knew about you, Ava. We've known for a while." The room shifted again. Ava felt it, the particular sensation of a floor she had thought was solid, revealing itself as something with more give in it. "Known what, specifically?" she said. "That you existed, that you'd been placed, that your handler went dark 14 months ago." He held her gaze. 14 months ago is also when Crane started running his secondary operation. We think your handler found out and Crane had him removed." The word "removed" did the thing that clinical language always did. It translated something violent and irreversible into something that sounded like an administrative decision. And the gap between the word and the reality was where grief lived, when you hadn't had time to let it be grief yet. Ava looked at the floor for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked up. "His name was Carver," she said. "David Carver. He was 52 years old, and he had a daughter in her 2nd year at Northwestern." She said it flatly, not for sympathy, but because she was not going to let the word "removed" be the last word. "He went dark 14 months ago, and I was told it was a communications failure. I was told to maintain cover and await contact." "Contact that never came," Reeves said quietly. "Contact that never came," she confirmed, "because the person who was supposed to make contact was Crane, and Crane had no interest in reactivating an asset whose handler he had just eliminated." The monitor beeped, steady, patient. The patient's eyes had opened again. He was looking at Ava with an expression that was no longer the measured assessment of an operative reading a room. It was something else, something that acknowledged a cost she had paid without anyone telling her she was paying it. "Carver recruited me," he said. The words were quiet, deliberate. He said the room was completely quiet. Reeves was looking at the window. Renee was looking at the floor. The 2 agents by the door had the professional stillness of people who understood they were inside a moment they were not part of. Ava reached out and adjusted the IV line, just to have something to do with her hands. Then she straightened up and said, "What's your name?" He looked at her. "Marcus," he said. Marcus Webb. All right, Marcus, she said. Here's what happens now. Crane is going to want a deal. He's going to offer names, contacts, networks, 14 months of operational intelligence from the secondary chain in exchange for a reduced situation. Reeves is going to take that deal because the names are worth more than the punishment. And that is the right call, even though it is going to feel like the wrong one. She looked at Reeves. Am I wrong? You're not wrong, Reeves said, which means the people who sent the shooter tonight are going to be identified and addressed through channels that will take time and produce outcomes that will not be fully visible to anyone in this room. She paused. That's the job. That's how it works. I'm not asking for anything different. Reeves looked at her carefully. What are you asking for? She thought about 11 months of ordinary shifts, of saline bags, and post-op rounds, and a teenager with a sprained ankle who had complained loudly enough to wake the waiting room. She thought about the specific, quiet relief of a life that did not require her to stand in hallways like this one. She thought about David Carver, who had placed her here, and who had gone dark 14 months ago, and whose removal had been administered by the same man who had just been zip-tied in this room. I want to know who pulled the trigger, she said. Not something. Ava looked at the name hanging in the air of Bay 1 and felt it settle somewhere specific GK her. Not in the place where anger lived, not in the place where grief lived, but in the place where purpose lived when it had been waiting a long time for a direction. Is he in the country? She said. As of 72 hours ago, Webb said, yes. Then he's findable, she said. GK's findable, Webb confirmed. GK. Reeves stepped out of the bay, phone pressed hard to his ear, his voice dropping to the register he used when the conversation was not for the room. The two agents by the door exchanged a look that was professional in its blankness. Renee was still standing near the foot of the bed, absorbing the sequence of the night in layers, each one requiring its own adjustment. At 3:27, Gerald Holt came back. He had not slept. He was still in his shirt and tie, the tie loosened now, the first button of the shirt undone. He looked at Crane's absence from the room without asking about it, which meant someone had already told him. He looked at Renee with an expression that was complicated and unresolved. Then he looked at Ava. The board is going to want a full report by morning, he said. A sanitized one, I'm told. Reeves's team is handling the language. Good, Ava said. I came in for a 7 o'clock shift. I had a patient in crisis. I provided appropriate care. She held his gaze. That's my story. Holt looked at her for a long time. His face moved through something that was not quite understanding and not quite acceptance, but lived in the neighborhood of both. He was a man who had built his professional life on the premise that he knew what was happening inside his hospital. Tonight had demonstrated, with considerable force, that there were things happening inside his hospital that no administrator's authority could fully contain. He was going to have to make peace with that. She could see him beginning to. Your employment is reinstated, he said, formally, with full back pay for the period of this evening. He cleared his throat. And I would ask that you consider staying on this floor. He paused. It seemed Renee, he had the look of a man who had just made several calls that were going to set a significant number of things in motion. And the adrenaline of it was sitting right under his surface, controlled but present. Volkov, he said to Ava, we have a location, not solid, a range, but it's enough to start building the approach. How long? She said. Days, maybe less if 2 other pieces come together the way I think they will. He looked at her carefully. I want you at the table when we build it. She looked at Marcus Webb. He was watching her with those steady eyes, and she could see now, past the fatigue and the blood loss and the long hours of performed unconsciousness, what Carver had recognized in him. The same quality Carver had apparently recognized in her 30 years of work ago. The particular combination of capability and commitment that made a person useful in situations where useful was a word that carried a lot of weight. He did it because an active, connected version of you was a threat to his secondary operation. He paused. He was right. You are a threat to that operation. And that operation is not finished just because Crane is in custody. The monitor beeped. The hallway outside was quiet. Somewhere on the second floor, a door opened and closed, and the ordinary sounds of a hospital at 4 in the morning settled around the room like something normal reasserting its right to exist. Ava thought about the 11 months, the saline bags, the post-op rounds, the teenager with the sprained ankle. She thought about the specific and genuine satisfaction of keeping someone's body working when it had decided to stop. The intimacy of that, the way it was its own complete thing, requiring nothing beyond itself. She thought about Carver, 52 years old, a daughter at Northwestern, removed, the clinical language said, gone, the honest language said, and that's going to require a level of operational clearance that technically lapsed when your handler went dark. Then reinstated, she said. You have the authority. I know you have the authority because you reinstated my hospital access in 10 minutes at 2 in the morning from a parking lot. She held his gaze. I want to be in the room. Reeves looked at Marcus Webb. Webb said, she earned it tonight. Reeves looked back at Ava. You'll need to be rebriefed. Full protocol. Renee followed a few minutes later, flanked by the agents who would spend the next several hours walking her through a debriefing that was going to be thorough and difficult and necessary. She stopped at the door and looked back at Ava. I'm glad you didn't step back, she said. Ava looked at her. Me too. Renee left. The room went quiet. Just the monitor. Just the breathing. He was all the ordinary architecture of nursing, performed at 4 in the morning with the same care she gave it at 4 in the afternoon. Webb turned his head and looked at her. You could have left, he said. When Holt fired you, you were at the door. I know, she said. Why didn't you? She thought about the push bar under her hand, the coat on her shoulders, the bag over her arm, the exact texture of the moment when she had taken her hand off the bar and turned back toward the room. Because his breathing settled into the rhythm of actual, genuine sleep, not performed, not controlled, but real. The monitor confirmed it, every readout moving in the right direction, every number settling into its proper place. Ava sat back in the chair. The hospital breathed around her. The hallway moved. The shift turned. The clock on the wall moved from 4 to 4:15 to 4:30, and the first gray suggestion of morning began to find its way into the parts of the building that faced east. She had come in at 7 the night before for a shift that was supposed to be ordinary. She had been grabbed and slammed and fired and reinstated and handed a covert operation and stood alone between a man's life and the people who wanted to end it. She had found the threat, stopped the attempt, identified the leak, and done it all in a building she had spent 11 months learning to think of as the whole of her professional world, not knowing, or perhaps choosing not to know, that the skills she had brought through its doors on day one were exactly the ones it would need on this night. 48 hours from now, a contact would come. A briefing would follow. A new operational chain would be built with her name in it. Volkov's location was being narrowed. The work that David Carver had started was going to continue, carried forward by the asset he had placed and the promise that placement had always represented. But right now, in this moment, at 4:37 in the morning in Bay 1 of Mercy General Hospital, Ava Harper was simply a nurse, sitting at the bedside of a patient who was going to survive, doing the quiet, essential, unspectacular work of making sure the numbers on the monitor stayed in the range they were supposed to stay in. She was a nurse. She was also other things. And tonight, both of those facts had been exactly enough.